Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Probably met like 4 or 5 different girls that he was with.
Another victim comes forward. The disturbing details of a Vancouver assault, allegedly by a man linked to the deaths of 3 others. Plus, frustration and concern as the government limits search and rescue crews after dark.
Not seeing or hearing birds, not seeing or hearing deer and moose populations was devastation.
And they're still suffering 5 years later, how a massive wildfire in the interior has left a community devastated.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Tonight, we're hearing from a woman who survived a terrifying encounter in Vancouver. The alleged victim says she was drugged and sexually assaulted by the same man linked to the deaths of 3 other women, including 14-year-old Noelle Soup. Michelle Gassoub has our top story tonight and a warning some of the details are disturbing.
When I was hearing about the 2 bodies found in that building, I was like, well, that's crazy. Like, I used to go in that building all the time.
For this woman, news that Noelle Soup and 2 unnamed women died in rooms rented by Van Chung Pham came as a shock. She had her own experience with the man she knew as Jimmy, who she says would offer women drugs before asking them to come to his room at the Heatley block.
He almost always had a different girl with him. I probably met like 4 or 5 different girls that he was with.
CBC is not naming this alleged victim because she formally accused Pham of sexual assault and a ban on her identity remains in place. In November 2020, she went up to Pham's room where she says he gave her powerful drugs that left her unable to move. She says she was then sexually assaulted.
I didn't even get fully dressed. So I think I left without my shoes on and not fully clothed, and yeah, I left really fast.
She went to the hospital for a rape kit and reported what happened to police. She had no idea Pham had been deemed a danger to vulnerable women and was in custody just weeks before they met. It haunts her knowing 2 other women were later found dead in that same room. One of them, Noelle Soup, who was just 14 years old.
It's really heartbreaking, and yeah. I feel bad for their families and stuff, so it's really messed up it doesn't make this place look good at all.
Police told her it was when they went to Pham's apartment to tell him he was being charged with her assault that they found him dead. The charges against him have since been stayed.
I would never want someone to die, that's for sure. But I think because there is no justice that will ever happen for the other girls, for me, and for past girls that I've never known about or will never know about, I think that's what's most upsetting. Although it's been tough, this whole thing up until now, I'm still glad that I did it because it's still unfolding a lot of things that need to be dealt with.
A young woman who did what she could to stop a man she now believes was a predator hiding in plain sight. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
If you or someone you know has encountered Pham or Noelle Soup, we want to hear from you. Please send us your tips via email to cbcvancouvernews@cbc.ca. The sentencing hearing for former Headley frontman Jacob Hoggard has started. The rock group singer has been convicted of sexual assault causing bodily harm. As Eli Glasner reports today, the woman who was assaulted spoke about the impact it's had on her life.
It's been nearly 6 years since a woman from Ottawa in her early 20s went to a hotel room in Toronto to meet Jacob Hoggard. In the end, a jury found that what happened in the Thompson Hotel in November of 2016 was sexual assault causing bodily harm and found Hoggard guilty. Today, that woman took the stand to tell the court how the Canadian musician destroyed her life. They'd first met at a concert in Ottawa, then arranged to meet at the Thompson Hotel. Before, she told the court she was a confident 23-year-old. Afterwards, she says she was never the same, telling the court the assault took away her worth, her privacy, and her body. Over a month-long trial, she and another music fan who accused Hogard of sexual assault took the stand. Hogard was eventually acquitted of sexually assaulting the other younger fan and found guilty of assaulting the Ottawa woman. In her victim impact statement today, the Ottawa woman said the trial re-victimized her, forcing her to recount the most traumatic moment of her life, confronting her with the voice of the man who assaulted her. After the assault, she told the court she struggled with depression and anxiety, recoiled from her friends and family, and lost out on job opportunities. While the victim said the justice system doesn't support survivors, she did thank the Crown and detective. She ended her victim impact statement with words directed to Hogard, words she says Hogard said to her in that hotel. "Don't worry, it will be over soon." But just as the case and jury deliberations dragged on, so is the sentencing, with multiple days still planned. The maximum penalty for sexual assault causing bodily harm is 14 years. The Crown is asking for 6 to 7. When the hearing does continue, 52 character reference letters on behalf of Hogard will be entered. After that, Justice Gillian Roberts says Jacob Hogard will be given an opportunity to speak. In the meantime, the Ottawa victim has initiated a $2.8 million lawsuit against Hogard, saying her life was forever changed and to require counseling indefinitely. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, a neighborhood group in Kitsilano is taking the city of Vancouver and the Squamish Nation to court over a major Indigenous development. As Josh Grant reports, it's centered around a massive new housing project near the Burrard Bridge.
The Kitts Point Residents Association wants the BC Supreme Court to quash a services agreement for Vancouver to manage utilities, fire, and policing at the new Sanok development. The city passed the motion in May behind closed doors. The association declined an interview with CBC News, but says in a news release that it believes the agreement is unlawful, unreasonable, and contrary to the provisions of the Vancouver Charter, arguing it breached the rules of procedural fairness and natural justice by not allowing residents to weigh in. One mayoral candidate agrees that Vancouver should slow down its current pace of development and ensure new real estate projects are well integrated into the neighborhoods where they're being built.
Well, it is Squamish land. It's their right to develop as they so desire, but it still is intersecting with Vancouver, and it's going to have a big effect.
Hardwick says it's important to have balance at Sanok, which will see 6,000 units and up to 10,000 people living in 11 towers.
With mobility, getting in and out of there on different forms of transportation, you need to think about schools and parks, community centers. You need to think about shops and stores and workplaces, and ultimately it needs to be affordable for the people that live here.
The Squamish Nation says it won't comment until its lawyers have time to review the court documents. The city sent CBC News a similar statement saying it was reviewing the petition. As for people who live nearby,
I just don't think the infrastructure is there, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to work it out.
Well, we have to see exactly what it's going to look like. We do need more rentals in the area, and if it's done properly, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
It's just over the top.
When I hear cars going up going over the bridge, it sounds like they're right next to me. So this every morning is just brutal.
Despite the court action, construction here is already underway, with the first phase of 3 buildings expected to start going up sometime next year. Josh Grant, CBC News, Vancouver.
One of Vancouver's mayoral candidates has promised to repeal the city's Broadway plan, which aims to provide housing for up to 50,000 people.
The autocratic top-down plans that came out of City Hall are now being plunked down on residents whether they like it or not. And Team believes that residents should have a voice in how their neighborhoods grow and develop. And we are the voice for all neighborhoods.
Colleen Hardwick says she would also drop the Vancouver plan, adding that the city ignored residents when the long-term plans were approved. Hardwick pledges that if elected with a majority in council, her party would reconsider the plans after giving local residents and businesses a meaningful voice. And of course, these municipal elections are happening province-wide on October 15th. So let's take you to Prince George now, where the battle is on to replace a two-term mayor. Catherine Hansen has more on who is running and what the issues are.
Here in Prince George, there's a total of 6 people in the running to replace Mayor Lynn Hall, who is stepping down after 2 terms. They are as follows: Adam Hyatt, Terry McConaughey, Lisa Mitchell, Roy Stewart, Chris Wood, and Simon Yu. Of these 6, there are 3 who have emerged as contenders. McConaughey is the only one in the group who has civic experience. She's served 2 terms on council, along with Stewart and Yu. Like many other urban communities, Prince George, which serves a population of nearly 90,000 and acts as a service center for North and Central BC, has seen a proliferation of homeless camps over the last 4 years. One of which the city is legally barred from shutting down until it can demonstrate enough appropriate housing is available for people to move into. So, what are the top 3 mayoral candidates proposing?
My thinking is, because we have all the natural resources in Prince George, we should develop a shelter, emergency shelter industry here that can provide the federal government. When there's a disaster happens somewhere, we will need to provide them with a home, ready to assemble homes.
I want to bring together First Nations, the province, the mayors of all the communities affected by this. I want them to understand that the only thing missing is actual treatment, medical, psychological treatment of these people. All the other efforts have not provided that.
So I don't have all of the answers, and anybody who tells you that they do or that they alone can fix them is just very ill-informed and will be disappointed. Only in working together can we solve these issues in a sustainable manner, and we, above all, have to start at the right place.
While the approaches are different, one thing is sure: there is work to be done when it comes to housing, public safety, and the toxic drug crisis, all of the challenges which continue to plague the city's downtown core. Catherine Hansen, CBC News, Prince George.
And for voters who can't make it to a polling booth because of a disability and haven't mailed in a ballot, the City of Vancouver is offering something new. The CBC's Saurabh Sandhu has more on the Homebound Voting plan.
Once we get the requests for a homebound visit, we will arrange for a time that's suitable for them. We bring the ballot to them, and then they can either vote on their own or they can request our assistance to help them mark the ballot.
And city officials say they have a way to make sure a voter's ballot stays secret.
Once we know who has signed up for it, it's registered as a vote by mail package, and instead of mailing it, we bring it to the voter. So it's in this an envelope, so with a secrecy envelope and the ballot inside.
Advocates for people who live with disabilities welcome the Homebound Voting program. It's a change they have been hoping for a long time.
For each disabled voter, it is one small step forward. For democracy, it is one giant step forward.
Lois says oftentimes people with disabilities face huge logistical challenges.
Long story short, to vote would be at minimum a half a day. Now, in addition to that, because I do not have the ability to steer my chair.
The deadline to register was October 1st, but now that's been extended to October 11th.
All they have to do is they can go online to apply for it, or if they need assistance, they can call 311 and request assistance to book the appointment.
Staff says the future of the program will depend on community feedback. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, on election night, be sure to tune in to CBC Vancouver for our live special on TV, radio, and online. We'll have in-depth analysis and up-to-the-minute results coverage. Across the province, reporters will bring you the latest news live from candidate headquarters. It all starts at 7 p.m. on October 15th and will continue throughout the evening. Well, the BC government has introduced new legislation to make a temporary cap on food delivery fees permanent.
we know that restaurant owners and operators have been concerned being charged high delivery fees again, along with all rising costs that they're seeing around food and labor. Our restaurants deserve to be supported to ensure prices remain affordable. That's why today I was so proud to introduce legislation that will allow government to permanently cap fees for delivery companies and what they charge their restaurants.
2 years ago, a temporary 20% cap was introduced to curb high fees that delivery companies were charging to restaurants. But that cap is set to expire at the end of this year. If the new legislation passes, it will also prevent delivery companies like Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes from reducing driver compensation. Well, the Vancouver Whitecaps have appointed a familiar face as the new general manager of women's programs, former national team goalkeeper Stephanie Bathe.
Stephanie Bathe will make the slow walk to the bench as she says farewell to Vancouver.
The retired Olympic gold and bronze medalist says she has big plans for the club and hopes to help build a professional women's league in Canada that will include a Whitecap squad. But she also wants to improve the club's image with fans after its response to allegations of misconduct by 2 former women's coaches.
And I promise to do my absolute best to take this club in a completely new direction, to stand up, to have the hard conversations, to enforce transparency and honesty moving forward.
Bathe says she's excited to be an advocate and a voice for change within the club. She says will not be relocating to Vancouver from her Calgary home. Well, 5 years after the Elephant Hill wildfire rocked the area around Ashcroft in BC's interior, the Bonaparte First Nation is still suffering. The fire destroyed its territory, and our Camille Vernet is looking at the challenges still ahead.
Burned trees, ashes on the ground. This is what remains of this forest.
It burned fast and it burned hard. Some of the ground, we had an expert come in, and some of the ground was burned 2 feet down.
In 2017, a wildfire burned through the region and damaged the deepest part of the ground. 5 years later, restoring the territory is crucial for the Bonaparte First Nation.
Not seeing or hearing birds, not seeing or hearing deer and moose populations was devastation. That meant that our reserve had to rely on other nations to invite us to go deer hunt so that our people could survive.
One disaster followed another. In 2018, flood ravaged the land already reeling from fire.
This used to be way over there. We probably lost 4 or 5 acres here. To this day, we're still spending a lot of our own money, but we probably spent post 2017 probably close to $1 million. In rehabilitation, we're doing riverbank restoration.
At UBC, this PhD candidate is working with several Indigenous communities to rebuild more resilient ecosystems.
There's a lot of talk about building back better after disasters, and often that's in the context of communities or infrastructure. But I think this is a really opportunity to build our forests back better.
She calls for planting a diversity of trees and long-term planning.
You know, we're bouncing from one disaster to the next. We've had multiple years of fire. So I think we still have a long way to go, and there needs to be a lot more funding and resources put into restoration and recovery, and a lot of that needs to go through communities.
She advocates for better collaboration and a sharing of expertise with First Nation, something the Bonaparte First Nation says is now happening.
The government is finally starting to ask us for our expertise in those areas, so it's a good thing now.
After the fire, the grow back is slow, but what is there is already playing a role.
You want things to start growing so that the soil doesn't erode as hard as it did post-fire. You know, we have hope and everything's starting to come back now.
Camille Vernet, Radio-Canada, Cache Creek.
Political leaders from the West Coast have signed a new climate agreement.
We've had fires that have been unprecedented. A community called Lytton in my town, in my province, no longer exists because of wildfires. We had atmospheric rivers, we had heat domes, terms that we'd never heard of before that have had a profound impact on our people, on our economy, and our way of life. And in order to address those challenges, we have to collaborate.
Premier John Horgan has partnered with the governors of California, Oregon, and Washington. The leaders have committed to building strong economies with smaller carbon footprints. The agreement includes investing in climate infrastructure like charging stations for electric vehicles across the region. BC, Washington State, Oregon, and California are part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which was formed almost 15 years ago. And Metro Vancouver has extended lawn watering restrictions until October 31st. It's all in an effort to conserve the region's drinking water. Now, the move is due to unseasonably warm and dry conditions. Yesterday alone, there were 11 daily maximum temperature records smashed across BC, and those conditions have resulted in historically low river flows and higher than average water demand. Homes and businesses are still only allowed to water lawns one morning every week and on designated days. And speaking of hot weather and all the effects, Kuljeet Kaila joins us now. Johanna is off this week. Kuljeet, any rain in the forecast at all?
And that's a big question that everybody is asking. There will be a little bit coming, but it's going to be a couple of days before that happens. But the good news for the air quality advisory today is part of it was lifted in the Fraser Valley. The Coquitlam wildfire is pretty much contained, but we are still dealing with a fire out in Chilliwack. So we've got some concerns for air quality from Hope all the way out down to Osoyoos. Now, the reason why it's so hot and humid today and dry is this high pressure system that's sitting over the south coast right now. That's going to start making its way down south, and in will come towards the end of the week a low pressure system from the north. This will sweep its way across BC from Prince George down to greater Vancouver and bringing just a little bit of rain, but that won't be for a few more days. Today was a classic example of being way above average. 20 degrees was today's high, about 5 degrees higher than the average. What's ahead? It'll cool down for tonight, 12 degrees, some more sun tomorrow at 14, and tomorrow's high will be about 20 degrees with mostly sunny conditions, a little bit of cloud. I'll have the 7-day forecast, Anita, coming up.
Okay, we'll wait for it. Thanks, Kuljeet. Well, a change of course that search and rescue crews say will save lives. After the break, why they'll now be allowed to do night hoists by helicopters. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Elementary and secondary school students in Inuvik recently caught a moose and butchered it. It's part of their community's land-based programming where they take part in a moose hunt and learn about the meat, which they ultimately share with their classmates.
We are cutting up moose, and in my opinion, I love it because it's my culture. My name is Indigo Taylor, and I am in grade 8. It's just really fun to me, but that's just me.
What's more dangerous, a dull knife or a sharp knife?
My name is Justin Cormier. I am the on-the-land coordinator at E3 Schools. We took students out from grade 9 to 12 out into the Beaufort Delta by boat, and we got a moose on the first day. It was a three-day program based out at the school cabins, and we not only harvested a moose, but we got a chance to do some fishing as well, so it was a really good trip for the students. This program has been going on for some time now. COVID kind of put an end to it, though, because we weren't able to do the overnight portions of it. So this is the first time, I think, in 3 years that we're returning to our moose program, and the students were really excited, and yeah, they had a great time at the cabins.
This is where the bladder would sit here, and if you puncture that, especially if the animal's in rough, it's really stinky.
Once we get back to the school here, we like to involve all the grades. So today, on the high school side here, grade 7 through to grade 12, everybody will have a chance to come down and work with the moose. Students have the option to take the moose home to their families, and whatever's left over we'll use at the school here for food programs and for feasts.
I'm gonna bring it to my mom. My mom's gonna cook it into a delicious something. I don't know what though. It's just so nice to do that in your own school. One school I very liked, but the one thing I did not like is you did not have free of mind of hunting-wise, because everybody thinks, oh, gross, blood, animals, dead, death, bad. Not to me. Death is life, life is death. It's just life.
Now to the North Shore, where we have just gotten word from the government that it's had a change of heart. North Shore Rescue has now been granted permission to perform nighttime hoist rescues by helicopter. Now, it's something they've been prevented from doing because of government regulations. North Shore Rescue team leader Mike Danks is just out of a meeting with Emergency Management BC and joins us live now. Mike, we were expecting to have you on the show to talk about the fact that you couldn't do these night hoists. Now you're able to, and we'll get into that in a moment, but can you talk about why it's so important that you're able to do this?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. And night hoisting, as well as using night vision goggles, has been a real game changer for search and rescue. And the primary reason for that is it provides rescuers with a safety net. If we have someone that gets injured during an operation at night and we need to extract them, the ability to use a night hoist is going to get them to medical care extremely fast and efficiently, and it's also going to be a huge asset for the community members that are recreating in the area as well if they run into trouble.
And for people who don't quite understand, can you take us through this? So how do you use those night goggles, and then how do you actually use the night hoist?
Yeah, so typically in the past, a call will come in for help within 60 to 45 minutes before darkness. So it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on rescuers to respond in a very quick fashion. Now with the use of night vision goggles, we can slow things down, we can put the goggles on, and we are capable of flying at night with the pilots. You have an incredible perspective at night from the air with the goggles. If there's any light source whatsoever, you're able to see that from kilometers away. So now if we do come across someone that is injured, we'll have the ability to hoist them at night so they'll be lifted up into the helicopter. The other, alternatively in the past, we would have to land that helicopter somewhere close by, and that might not have been an option, and then send crews in overland. Again, which puts our crews at risk. It takes a tremendous amount of time to do, and it's not optimal for patient care.
So are there any restrictions with these latest developments from government in terms of what you can do?
So we're going to be working through what this trial program looks like in the coming weeks. For the time being, though, if we do get a call that comes in for someone that is critically injured and they need evacuation at night, we have been given the green light to proceed with that night hoist. So the details are yet to be worked out, but the positive thing is that we are moving forward, and I really attribute that to the tremendous community support that we've had.
Just quickly here before we let you go, the weather obviously unusually warm into this October now. How has that affected your team? Are you dealing with a lot more rescues?
Yeah, we certainly are. Anytime we have nice weather, we have lots of people that are getting out into the backcountry, and it serves a good reminder to everyone that The sun is going down a lot earlier, so make sure you're prepared for that. And then to also keep in mind the temperatures are dropping at night, so that's another factor you need to consider.
Mike Danks live tonight with North Shore Rescue. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, more sponsors icing out Hockey Canada. The fallout from its handling of a sexual assault case is next.
British Columbia as well, and it's just one more sign that the economy in BC is slowing down. Terry Malefsky reports.
For years, Canadians have counted on BC to be different, bucking the national trend and creating more and more jobs in a surging economy powered by the forest industry. Not anymore.
Our real growth in 1996 will be zero. In other words, we're going to have a flat economy, no growth.
BC's legendary growth has stalled. Unemployment is up 9.2%, the same as Ontario. Consumers are not spending, government revenues are down, and the NDP premier sounds like the fiscal conservatives he ran against.
And we said we'd cut spending to deal with the revenue shortfall, and that's what we intend to do.
Glenn Clark's campaign promises about economic growth have been drastically downsized.
At some point, sooner or later, that growth was not going to continue, and it's happened a little sooner than some of us projected.
This alarming slowdown in what is supposed to be booming BC is much more than a short-term embarrassment for the government. Some economists believe the real issue is that the slowdown in the key forest sector is a long-term problem and maybe even a permanent one.
The growth of the BC forest industry, which has gone on for decades, is over.
This expert believes the glory days of the forest business are gone for good.
You know, a growing forest industry has been the reason for a growing provincial economy, and if we want the provincial economy to continue growing, we're going to have to find some other basis.
High taxes, environmental regulations, and just plain bad markets are all blamed for the decline. And tourism is often touted as an alternative. Revenues are up 6% over last year's. But that's still not enough to change the zero-growth outlook for BC. Still, it seems a great place to visit, but not so great if you're looking for a job. Terry Malefsky, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, there's more criticism tonight against Hockey Canada's leadership. The Prime Minister and Sports Minister both taking threatening shots at the organization, and more key sponsors have pulled their money. As David Cochran reports, it's in response to how Hockey Canada has handled sexual assault allegations.
From the heights of national pride, Hockey Canada has plummeted to the depths of national scandal. Things so bad, the Prime Minister says it may be time to scrap Hockey Canada entirely.
They need to realize that if we have to create an organization, get rid of Hockey Canada and create an organization called Canada Hockey instead, people will look at doing that.
The political support was lost weeks ago, part of growing calls for Hockey Canada's leadership to resign over its failure to address a culture that's seen multiple cases of alleged group sexual assault. Now, it's the money that's going. Canadian Tire has permanently ended its relationship with Hockey Canada, saying Hockey Canada continues to resist meaningful change. This, along with the departure of other corporate sponsors, a list that includes TELUS, Tim Hortons, Esso, Scotiabank, Chevrolet, Sobeys, and Skip the Dishes. Most have suspended or paused their funding, in some cases only for men's hockey. Corporate Canada seemingly rendering its verdict on this defiant parliamentary committee appearance by Hockey Canada's new chair.
Our board, frankly, does not share the view that senior leadership should be replaced on the basis of what we consider to be substantial misinformation and unduly cynical attacks.
They no longer have support of their sponsors, of Canadian families that are sending their kids to play hockey, and they're also losing support from their own members. So I hope that they understand the message and leave before they burn it to the ground.
All of this comes as provincial hockey associations are reviewing their ties or withholding fees from Hockey Canada, that brand now so toxic that organizations and companies are rejecting a national icon. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
An Okanagan golf resort is the latest to cut ties with Hockey Canada amid its handling of sexual assault allegations. Predator Ridge Golf Course and Resort near Vernon has quietly separated from Hockey Canada. For years, the resort has promoted its connection with the organization and was dubbed the summer home of Hockey Canada. But the resort tells CBC it suspended that relationship back in June and would only consider a future partnership if plans were put in place to establish the integrity and values Canadians expect. A warning for you, this next story does contain disturbing details. Thailand is in grief and utter shock after a horrific rampage in a small town. A man with multiple weapons stormed a daycare and killed 36 people. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, the majority of the victims were very young children.
Harrowing scenes at a childcare center in Nong Balong Phu province in northeastern Thailand, where dazed teachers and parents try and comfort each other in the wake of the unthinkable. A father armed with a knife and a gun forced his way into the preschool around lunchtime and began attacking a room full of napping children. Those killed included children as young as 2 and a pregnant staff member. This teacher says the man began with a knife. Others are still in disbelief.
I held my hands up and begged for mercy. I didn't know what to do.
Because he's a parent of one of the kids, at first I thought he was coming to pick up his kid. He didn't say anything. He shot at the door while the children were sleeping.
He didn't say anything. I was shocked.
For this emergency responder, no stranger to mass casualty events, the scene inside the daycare was shocking.
They were little kids who were still sleeping. They were in a place where they're supposed to be innocent, and I don't think they will ever know what happened to them.
Thai authorities say the attacker was a 34-year-old former police officer, fired for drug use, who spent the morning in court. After fleeing the daycare, he continued his attack, shooting at bystanders, then going home where he killed his wife and child, and finally himself. The deadliest mass murder by a single person in Thailand's history. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Rescue crews in Zaporizhia, Ukraine, are combing through rubble searching for survivors. At least 7 people are dead after Russian missiles hit in a pre-dawn attack. Briar Stewart is there speaking to families desperate to know the fate of their loved ones.
It took just a moment to destroy so many lives, but hours to find all of the victims. There are few words to describe this kind of anguish. For Anatoly Zuba, it's a torturous wait.
Babushka.
His son Alexander, his wife and her parents lived on the 2nd floor of this building. It was hit by a missile, one of 7 fired at the city just before sunrise. Buildings ignited while residents woke in terror. This man was inside the apartment complex at the time. He was one of the lucky ones. I was thrown by the blast in my own home, said this man. The building across the street caught fire and the shop started on fire. Zuba, who was at work, rushed over as soon as he could and now forces himself to look at the bodies pulled out to see if it's one of his loved ones. I'm waiting, he said. They found a woman from the 5th floor. They found a man, but mine they haven't found yet. His relatives are presumed dead, but crews miraculously found several survivors buried here and tried to get them all out even as the threat remained high. These rescue crews had to pull back from the site earlier because there were air raid sirens and reports of more explosions in the city, so they were ordered to take cover along with everyone else. Some ran to underground shelters. We too looked for safe places to wait, at times alongside police and volunteers like Antonina Nosach. She lives an hour away but drove in when she heard about the attack because she wanted to help. It's scary, of course, when they indiscriminately hit houses where people live, she said. This is our home. How can we react to this? 3 other missiles were fired at Zaporizhia, hitting what Ukraine described as infrastructure. When the sirens ended, what was now a recovery mission continued. And so did the cleanup of the surrounding area. This city is in a region which Russia recently proclaimed as its own, which makes the destruction and Zuba's unbearable pain all the more difficult to comprehend. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Zaporizhia.
Well, they're tasty, but boy, are they a growing problem. How blackberries are hurting native species and the efforts to clear them out. Next.
Hey guys, have you ever taken your uncle to an art gallery and you're in a room where there's like 1,700 daisies on the floor, there's a toy piano in the middle of the room and a huge model of a moon hanging over the whole thing, and your uncle is like, what is this? I'm so mad. And he goes to the gallery cafe to eat a resentful bowl of soup and think about the good old days? I'm Professor Lees. I have 193 PhDs, 24 masters, and almost 1 BA. And for this edition of Art 101, we're talking about installation, that form of art that seems like it should be sculpture, but has way more parts and makes your uncle mad. A sculpture is fairly easy to define. Encyclopedia Britannica calls it an artistic form in which hard or plastic materials are worked into 3-dimensional art objects. So, sculpture is a 3-dimensional thing. Maybe it's a portrait bust or a unicorn or just a plain-looking box. But it's an object, it's tangible, and it's in one piece. You can pick it up if it's not too heavy, or you can take it away in a truck. Or you can just point at it and say, hey, that's a sculpture. The word installation is a bit different. Call it sculpture's complicated cousin. An installation might take up a whole room. It might have some video, a bunch of sculptures, maybe even some wind or some sound. An installation is made of many elements that have a relationship to each other to make a larger point or build a larger story. And rather than the specific objects being independently important, it's the relationship between all of them that creates meaning. Let's look at some examples. Remember that Yayoi Kusama exhibition where you lined up for 18 hours so your uncle could get a selfie in one of her infinity rooms? In those rooms, there were a multitude of elements that made the room amazing. Pumpkins, mirrors, twinkling lights. Each object or sculpture itself was just a thing, but the atmosphere they created together was magical and made a tiny closet feel like an immense landscape. Ai Weiwei is a Chinese political artist protesting the regime in which he grew up. He's a highly rebellious artist, and installation art has been his most powerful medium. Take sunflower seeds, where he used 100 million porcelain replicas of sunflower seeds made by 1,600 people to comment on his feelings about mass production. The sheer scale of this installation, tiny seeds filling up a massive space, made a huge political statement. Some artists go even bigger in installation art. Christo and his partner Jean-Claude made their reputation by covering huge landmarks with draped pieces of cloth. They also called their work environmental art. So why are installations important? Why not just stick to sculpture? If we break it down to its simplest, installations let artists do things that sculpture can't. Artists use installation to involve us more with the art. We get to stand in a space and have a different experience than looking at a single object, which in turn might make us think a little more or feel a little more. Installations let artists comment on the world in a complex way and make us part of the experience. They're also tricky to sell, so kudos to the artists for taking a risk. In conclusion, installations are really good at making uncles angry and forcing them to eat soup. But I hope you can use this little primer to convince your uncle to give that installation another go and keep your relationship going until your next gallery visit. I'll see you both here next time for more Art 101.
BC Votes 2022. Housing, safety, transportation, and climate change. What do the next 4 years look like? Watch CBC News and stay informed at cbc.ca/BCVotes. Well, a fun afternoon of flower picking in the yard ended with burns, blisters, and puffy faces for 2 kids in the Okanagan. They came across a toxic invasive plant. 2 girls were picking flowers for a bouquet in their grandparents' home in Fintry, BC, when they came across a Myrtle Spurge. The next morning, the girls had burns and blisters on their skin. Their grandparents reported the plant. Now, the Myrtle Spurge was first imported from overseas as a gardening plant, but it can get very toxic if it spreads past the garden fence. Now, the Invasive Species Council of BC is urging gardeners to stop planting it and to remove it from their gardens.
Over 60% of our plants are intentionally planted. Let's stop planting them. Let's make sure that you're plant-wise. So before you buy a new plant or trade it with your neighbor, make sure it's not invasive. Make sure it's actually something that's safe to have in our gardens or parks.
The Myrtle Spurge has small yellow flowers and sharp leaves that spiral around the stem. In BC, it's most commonly found in the Okanagan region in uncultivated lands and is toxic when consumed. Yeah, I had some in my garden and pulled it out. Thankfully, no burns for me. But let's go from one invasive species to another. While not as dangerous, blackberries can be a serious problem for our forests, and they spread very quickly. Now, workers in Stanley Park are trying to eradicate the berries, and they're telling us why that's so important.
In the area we're standing, the blackberry has kind of grown physically on top of all of the native bushes, the salmonberry, thimbleberry. Eventually, it will start shading them out so they're not getting any of the sunlight. It's also competing for nutrients in the soil. If left alone over a few years to a decade, the blackberry will pretty quickly be the only shrub in the entire area. It's bad for birds. Birds need food all through the summer and everything. The blackberry only has its berries pretty late in nesting season, whereas if this was an area of all thimbleberry, salmonberry, snowberry, things like that, they berry at different times, each species, so the birds would have a more consistent food supply throughout their entire nesting season rather than just the tail end of it. Many invasive plants come from gardens. English ivy is a really big example of a garden plant that was and still is planted in people's gardens all the time and often escapes into parks nearby. There's a lot of invasive lilies in Beaver Lake, and we know those were planted in the 1930s. But today, if you go to Beaver Lake, you can hardly see the water. It's all lilies. We quite often get asked where the lake is when people are standing right next to it. For just Stanley Park, we can kind of have goals to remove all the invasives from certain parts of the park. Removing them from the entire park, especially within our small nonprofit scale, is pretty not feasible. But we can work on areas like this, and a lot of the sides of Lost Lagoon used to be a blackberry berm just like this one. And now you can see there's a lot more bush diversity. Blackberries are popping back in, so we come back, dig them out. But a lot of the lagoon is no longer completely dominated by blackberries. Quite often we go into a question of prioritizing specific areas that are more damaged or maybe more at risk, some sensitive habitats, things like that. Invasive Species Council of Metro Vancouver, Invasive Species Council of BC, they're all good resources that publish materials on what plants are invasive, what aren't, how to identify them. They send out notices for new plants that are found. That's how we know what to look out for. and joining community groups around. Like we here at Stanley Park have our own community-based volunteering events, but there's tons of them all around Metro Vancouver and BC where you can get involved and actually do something about it as well.
Joanna Wagstaff is away. Kuljeet is here. And Kuljeet, a lot of talk these days about the drought situation in BC. So how are things looking today?
Well, today's drought map is still showing level 4 for parts of British Columbia around Prince Rupert, and for the greater Victoria area as well. There were some temperatures that broke on Vancouver Island today. It was that hot today and warm. It's all because of a high pressure system that's sitting on top of the southern coast right now, and it's going to be there for the next couple of days. It's kind of trapping in all that warm temperature, and because of that, this is what we saw. Port Alberni set a new record for temperature high for today, 27 degrees, beating a 2012 record. Similar thing happened in Kelowna, sitting at 24 degrees, and Williams Lake even got up to 21 degrees, which is very high for this time of year for that part of BC. Now, this also means today's fire danger rating is seeing some extreme conditions, still high to extreme in those same areas where those warm temperatures are on the island and parts of the Cariboo region as well. Current temperatures right now still sitting at 21 degrees for Kelowna, 22 in Abbotsford, so nice and warm still. And that warm trend is going to continue all through the weekend with temperatures up to 21 degrees for Saturday. That little bit of rain that we're going to see when the low pressure system does move in is late Sunday into Monday, but it's not bringing a lot of rain, just a little bit for Vancouver. And into Tuesday, we're right back to sun and clouds again. And then for Wednesday and Thursday, sitting around 20 degrees, still above seasonal temperatures. Anita?
Yeah, that really is crazy to see. We're just going into October with these a lot of this sunshine. Thanks, Kuljeet.
You're welcome.
Let's turn to Hurricane Fiona now. When it hit Canada's east coast, little was left unscathed. Assessing all of the damage has been an endless task. Jessica Doria-Brown has more on the cleanup at Prince Edward Island National Park.
Just beyond these gates, it's clear to see why PEI National Park is closed right now. Trees toppled, roads gone. So much damage, a national team had to come in to help.
So our team is 15 people, and it combines experts in logistics, incident management, planning, geomatics, and communications.
Officials with Parks Canada expect the initial assessment and cleanup work to take months, and it's clear why. Roads, paths, boardwalks, and stairs have been torn apart. Many trees are still in the way, and coastal erosion has wiped out anywhere from 3 to 10 meters of shoreline in some sections. To help people understand just how much damage there is, Parks Canada has added this feature to its PEI National Park website, before and after photos of some of the worst areas. Here, you can see the amount of coastal dune erosion at Greenwich. These aerial photos show the access ramp at Stanhope Beach, completely wiped out by the storm. And here, substantial damage to the dunes in East Brackley, which once surrounded the access ramp to that beach.
The impact has been very stark, and it's very obvious, and I think everyone's a little bit sad about what has been lost, but also pretty determined to recover from this and to move forward.
Moving forward will take a significant amount of time, not just on ecosystems, but park infrastructure too. This campsite, once surrounded by tall trees, now feels open and empty. Trees from that area are now stacked here, and some of them will be used in the months to come in an effort to try and rebuild some of the sand dunes. It's not yet clear when the park will be able to reopen, but officials say expect that to happen gradually, with some areas that will need to remain closed to the public longer than others. Jessica Doria-Brown, CBC News, PEI National Park.
A Vancouver icon, Café du Soleil, has suddenly closed shop. Why they've called it quits and the impact on Vancouver's art scene is next.
Bump, bump. When I say we're going to go on the try shot today, he brightens up.
Definitely.
Do you see any rafts? You see the people on the beach over there? Hi, I'm Amy, and this is Pat, my dad. You want to ride? I love you. It's fun, eh? Yep. Dad, in particular, has dementia, so everything is like on fast forward for him. Beautiful day, eh? We're just going to go down the path a little bit. Trying to keep up to my dad got me motivated to find ways to keep him going. And for a couple of years, I was researching these bikes. Cycling Without Age is a program where we go into care homes and community groups and take people who maybe can't ride bikes anymore out for bike rides in a specially designed bike we call a Trishaw. It's got 2 wheels in the front, 1 in the back. Here we go, Dad. The Trishaw is fantastic for accessibility. So anyone who can't otherwise go for a long walk or cycle, there's this platform that comes out. They walk in with their canes, even a wheelchair. I'll grab these for you. Yeah. Okay. We can help them in as long as they can sit up on their own. We put the seatbelt on and we're moving. Have a high five. Let's go. On your left. And so far he's behaved. So I haven't kicked him off yet. And I've behaved.
Yeah, of course.
Hey?
Yeah.
You haven't fired me as your driver, as your pilot yet, have you?
No, I don't dare.
We try to experience different places. So for example, we'll come along the river one day. There's a beautiful Christmas tree trail across the river. We'll go through the forest. On another day, we'll go in different neighborhoods. We'll visit neighbors, and then we'll stop on the side of the path and go for a walk. We're able to go outside pretty much all year. In the winter time, we will do some rides. We have blankets, we have extra hats and whatnot. And so we can actually go out and look at Christmas lights in the evening. Sustenance. Here you go, Dad. We all have a paradigm about seniors and disabled. And that's got to change, especially in our culture, in our society. We have to start accepting the fact that we are all destined to get older. And these people are brilliant. He's volunteered, he's done so many sports, he's contributed, he's had the best parties you've ever seen in your life. And, you know, they deserve to be cared for. We've always gotten along, eh?
Oh, for sure.
And now it just gives us more depth of love.
Yeah, that's right.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
From poets to emerging musicians and the wider public. There's shock this week after the abrupt closure of Café du Soleil. The Commercial Drive restaurant announced it's shutting its doors on social media. Rafferty Baker spoke to guests who call it a place of cultural comfort.
I'm really shocked, and I'm upset by it, actually.
It's sad things.
A simple handwritten note on the door. Cafe closed forever. It's attracting lots of attention from people passing by the Commercial Drive institution. News of the closure came as a surprise this week.
These places are critical to the urban fabric of our city.
Blues musician Robert Connolly Farr grew up in Mississippi, but he's lived in Vancouver for 16 years. Even before he moved here, he landed an early career gig at Café du Soleil.
It was, at that time, the biggest thing I'd ever done.
Farr played there many times, went to watch friends play, and just enjoyed the food.
You think that some places you just never see leave, you know, but it happens, you know. So on one hand, it hurts my heart, but on the other hand, the way things have been going in the last 15 years, it's not surprising.
The cafe was a hub for spoken word artists, slam poets, emerging musicians, and neighbors who just came to take it all in.
It's one of the few places you can go to, and it's not just about the alcohol or the music, it's about learning about the community. And I'm really sad to see that it's going.
Stephen Paul Taylor says he played at the cafe religiously every Thursday for years. He remembers his first performance there. They enlisted a hula hoop performer at the last minute.
It was a refuge for outsiders in a way. It was a place for people like me. I've always been kind of a little off the beaten path, and it was a place where people like-minded, like me and a lot of people I know could sort of congregate.
Taylor doesn't live in Vancouver anymore, but he was still affected by the news of the closure when he saw it online.
I was kind of dumbfounded. It's quite a shock.
The owner, Jeff Maisonette, wouldn't agree to a recorded interview, but he told CBC News the restaurant was becoming impossible to run. Major staffing challenges, soaring inflation driving his costs sky high. Maisonette says he would have had to double his prices to keep going. So after nearly 3 decades of serving as a rare venue for performing artists, the sun has set on Café du Soleil. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yeah, you know, we're seeing a lot of important cultural spaces closing throughout the province, places giving local artists of all kinds a place to shine. Well, that's it for CBC Vancouver News tonight. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.